All right, so are you ready to really dive deep into history? We're going to be looking at Frederick Douglass's narrative.
Oh, wow.
Narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah, and it's a first-hand account of slavery in America.
Yeah.
And it's going to be an experience that'll stay with you.
You know, it's one thing to read about this in like a textbook.
Right.
But to step into the shoes of someone who actually went through it.
Exactly.
That's what we're going to be doing today.
It's not just history.
Yeah.
This is like someone's life.
Absolutely.
This is someone's lived experience, and a pretty intense one at that.
Yeah.
Douglass was born into slavery, escaped to freedom, and became a major figure in the fight against slavery.
And what's really striking about his narrative is just the honesty.
Yeah.
There's no sugarcoating.
Right.
You're hearing it straight from him.
It's the unfiltered truth.
Yeah.
So even the preface to this narrative, which is written by William Lloyd Garrison,
Right.
famous abolitionist, is a call to action. But before we even get to that, I think it's worth setting the scene a bit.
Okay.
Garrison actually witnessed Douglass's first public speech
Wow.
at an abolitionist convention in Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine that a fugitive slave
Yeah.
standing on a stage sharing his story?
It must have been electrifying.
Yeah.
And according to Garrison, Douglass was hesitant at first.
Right.
Which, you can understand why,
Of course.
given the danger he was in.
Right.
But then something incredible happened.
What was that?
Douglass just captivated the entire audience
Wow.
with his eloquence.
Really?
Garrison even compared him to Patrick Henry,
Wow.
the Revolutionary orator.
Oh, my
They
goodness.
said it was like the most eloquent speech he'd ever heard.
That's amazing.
And, Garrison was a savvy activist.
Right.
And he used this moment so brilliantly.
Oh, yeah. How so?
He rallied support for Douglass right then and there,
Wow.
and the abolitionist cause.
So he wasn't just blown away by the speech?
Nope.
He saw an opportunity to use this.
Absolutely. He leveraged the power of Douglass's words.
Wow.
And right there on the spot, he pledged protection for Douglass,
Wow.
even though it meant defying pro-slavery laws.
Oh, wow.
So you can really feel the tension and the defiance in that moment.
Yeah.
A testament to both Douglass's voice and Garrison's commitment.
Absolutely. And I think it really sets the stage for the power of the narrative that follows.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that struck me when I was reading Douglass's own words
Okay.
was how he talked about his childhood, and he didn't even know his own birth date.
Wow.
What kind of impact does that have on someone to not even know when they were born?
It's more than just not knowing a date.
Right.
It's about being denied just a basic understanding of yourself,
Yeah.
your origins,
Mm-hmm.
your place in the world.
Right.
It's a tactic of dehumanization.
Yeah.
Slaves weren't meant to have personal histories,
Right.
to be seen as individuals with their own stories. They were treated as property,
Yeah.
and that meant stripping them of their past.
That's such a good point. And it makes you realize that the cruelty of slavery,
Yeah.
it went far beyond just physical violence.
Oh, absolutely.
This is about breaking someone's spirit,
Yeah.
denying their very identity.
Yeah.
And this becomes even clearer when Douglass describes witnessing
Right.
the brutal whipping of his Aunt Hester.
Oh, it's a horrifying scene.
It is.
And the language he uses is just so vivid and powerful.
It's intense.
He talks about the blood-stained gate,
Right.
the entrance to the hell of slavery.
Right.
It's not just an account, it's imagery that sears itself into your mind.
It really does.
And you have to remember, Douglass was just a child when he witnessed this.
Right.
I mean,
Imagine that terror.
I know.
The feeling of helplessness.
Absolutely.
He must have been terrified that he would be next.
That constant threat of violence.
Right.
The knowledge that it could happen to you at any moment
Yeah.
was a tool of control to keep the slaves in a state of fear and submission.
It's heartbreaking, and then Douglass goes on to describe life on Colonel Lloyd's plantation,
Right.
which he calls the Great House Farm.
Yeah.
It's almost like a world unto itself,
Yeah, it is.
with its own strained hierarchy and social dynamics.
That hierarchy is fascinating.
Yeah,
Even within the enslaved community, there was this pecking order.
really.
Yeah. Those who worked at the Great House Farm were seen as more privileged,
Oh, wow.
closer to the master.
Wow.
So it was a twisted system that the slaveholders used
Right.
to create division and discourage unity amongst the enslaved.
It's like this warped version of ambition and achievement,
Exactly.
but all within the confines of this, horrific system.
Absolutely. And another fascinating aspect of plantation life
Okay.
that Douglass describes are the slave songs.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't initially understand their deeper meaning,
Right.
but then later recognized them as expressions of sorrow.
Right.
Longing for freedom.
There's this common misconception that slave singing meant that they were content.
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
It wasn't happiness they were expressing.
Right.
It was a way to release pent-up emotion.
Right.
To cope with their pain.
Yeah.
They're longing for a life that they were denied.
Right.
It's almost like a form of resistance.
Yeah.
Expressing their humanity in the face of dehumanizing conditions.
It's like reclaiming their voices, even if it was through song.
Exactly.
And speaking of voices, we come to a pivotal moment in Douglas's narrative.
Okay.
The moment he learns to read. And this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
It's actually Douglas's own master, Captain Auld,
Right.
who unintentionally reveals the power of literacy. I remember the part.
Yeah.
Captain Auld forbids his wife from teaching Douglas any further.
Exactly.
Doesn't he?
He says, and I'm paraphrasing here,
Okay.
that if you teach a slave to read, there's no keeping him.
Wow.
He'll become unmanageable.
Wow.
And of no value to his master.
Right.
It's as though he inadvertently gave Douglas the key to his own liberation.
So even Captain Auld recognized that knowledge is power.
Precisely.
Even for a slave.
Yeah.
And this only fuels Douglas's desire to learn even more.
Oh, yeah.
He starts teaching himself in secret.
Wow.
Trading bread with white boys for reading lessons.
Oh.
Using anything he could find to practice writing.
He was so resourceful.
It's amazing. It's a testament to his determination.
Yeah.
His thirst for knowledge.
Absolutely.
But I imagine this knowledge was also a burden in a way.
You're absolutely right. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The more Douglas learns, the more he realizes just how unjust his situation is.
Right.
His literacy ignites this desire for freedom,
Yeah.
but it also intensifies his awareness of his own suffering.
It's like this cruel paradox.
Yeah.
The very thing that empowers him also deepens his pain.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder how he managed to cope with that tension.
Yeah.
That inner conflict.
Well, that's a question that we can explore further as we delve deeper into his experiences,
Okay.
particularly when we get to his time with Edward Covey,
Oh, boy.
the infamous slave breaker.
Okay, I'm already feeling the tension building.
Yeah.
Let's move on to that chapter of Douglas's story.
Right.
So we talked about like the power of Douglas's voice.
Right.
And the dehumanizing aspects of slavery.
Yeah.
But now we're getting to a really intense part of his narrative.
Right.
His time with Edward Covey.
Oh.
Who was this guy?
Covey was known as a slave breaker.
Okay.
And that term's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
He was hired by slave owners to just crush any spark of defiance
Wow.
in their slaves.
Yeah. Man.
Using whatever means necessary.
I can already sense this isn't going to be pleasant.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Douglas describes being utterly broken by this man,
Wow.
physically and mentally.
Oh, wow.
He talks about collapsing from exhaustion.
Right?
Enduring brutal beatings, it's really hard to read.
And this wasn't just about physical punishment, though, right?
Right.
Covey was cunning.
Oh, yeah. Covey understood the psychology of control,
Yeah.
deception, manipulation,
Right.
unpredictable bursts of cruelty
Oh, wow.
to keep the slaves constantly on edge,
Oh, man.
never knowing when the next blow might fall.
Right.
So this created an atmosphere of terror
Right.
that was arguably more effective than just brute force alone.
It's like he was trying to break their spirits.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And for a while, it seemed like he was succeeding with Douglas.
Oh, wow.
But then something extraordinary happens.
What's that?
Douglas decides to fight back.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, that must have taken incredible courage.
Oh, it was a huge risk.
Yeah.
But for Douglas, it was about more than just self-defense. It was
Yeah.
about reclaiming his dignity,
Yeah.
his sense of self-worth,
Okay.
that he would not be completely subjugated,
Right.
that a part of him remained unbroken.
So, like, walk us through this fight.
Okay.
What
It
happened?
was this brutal, desperate struggle. Douglas describes Covey's surprise, even fear,
Yeah.
as this seemingly submissive slave suddenly turns on him.
Wow.
But in the end, Douglas prevails. He wins the fight.
Wow, that must have been such a turning point for him.
Absolutely. It's pivotal in his narrative.
Yeah.
That fight wasn't just about physical strength.
Right.
It was about reclaiming his agency,
Yeah.
his right to resist this oppression.
Wow.
And it just solidified his determination to be free.
That leads us, of course, to his escape.
Right.
One of the most thrilling parts of this whole narrative.
Oh, yeah.
So Douglas had been planning this for months.
Yeah. Meticulously planning it.
Right.
He understood the risks, the danger involved.
Right.
You could feel the tension and urgency in his writing as he describes those final days
Yeah.
leading up to his escape from Baltimore.
So he disguised himself as a sailor.
Yes, he did.
Right.
And he talks about that constant fear of capture,
Right.
not being able to trust anyone.
Right.
He also intentionally remains vague about certain details.
Okay, well, why is that?
Douglas had two main reasons for being vague.
Okay.
First, he wanted to protect those who helped him,
Right.
the people who risked their own lives to support his escape,
Yeah.
many of whom were part of the Underground Railroad.
Okay.
So he wouldn't want to jeopardize their safety.
Of course not.
And secondly, he didn't want to give away too much information
Right.
about the Underground Railroad's operations.
Right.
He knew that his narrative could be read by slave owners,
Right.
and he didn't want to compromise this vital network
Yeah.
that was helping so many enslaved people escape to freedom.
So it's remarkable how he manages to convey the intensity of his experience
Yeah.
while still being mindful of those risks.
It speaks to his intelligence
Yeah.
and his strategic thinking.
Yeah.
He understood the power of his story,
Right.
but he also knew the importance of protecting those who were still vulnerable.
So he makes it to New York.
He does.
He's finally in the free North.
right.
What's his reaction?
Relief, of course. But also this persistent sense of unease.
Really?
You have to remember, even in the North, he wasn't truly safe.
Right.
The Fugitive Slave Act meant that he could be captured
Right.
and returned to slavery at any moment.
Wow. So freedom, at least at that point, was a relative term.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then Douglas makes his way to New Bedford, Massachusetts,
Okay.
a bustling port city
Right.
with a strong abolitionist presence.
Wait.
And here, his narrative takes on a whole new dimension.
What do you mean?
Well, in New Bedford, Douglas encounters a world
Yeah.
unlike anything he'd ever known.
Really?
He sees industry and commerce thriving
Right.
without the brutality of slavery.
Okay.
He sees black families living freely, working, raising children, participating in society.
What was his reaction to all of this?
Initially, he's almost in disbelief.
Really?
He couldn't quite comprehend that a place like this could even exist.
Wow.
It's a testament to how deeply slavery had just warped his perception of the world.
It's like he'd been living in a nightmare and suddenly he wakes up to a different reality.
Yes, and that realization is both exhilarating and disorienting.
Right.
It's this moment of profound transformation.
Yeah.
As he begins to, shed the psychological shackles of slavery
Right.
and embrace a new understanding of what freedom could mean.
That brings us to another significant encounter.
Okay.
Didn't Douglas discover the Liberator newspaper
Yeah.
while in New Bedford?
He did,
Yeah.
and it's a pivotal moment.
Oh,
Remember, the Liberator was the very newspaper
right.
edited by William Lloyd Garrison,
Right.
the man who wrote the preface to Douglas's narrative.
It's like his full circle moment
Yeah.
connecting back to that first public speech.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Liberator was known for its radical stance on abolition.
Right.
It called for the immediate and unconditional end to slavery,
Wow.
which was a pretty extreme position at the time.
So how did this newspaper impact Douglas?
It ignited his passion for the cause. Reading the Liberator exposed him to just this broader abolitionist movement.
Yeah.
The arguments for immediate emancipation, the strategies being employed,
Right.
it fueled his desire to use his own experiences,
Yeah.
his own powerful voice to contribute to the fight.
So we're seeing this evolution of Douglas from a man escaping slavery
Right.
to a man actively fighting against it.
Precisely. And this is where his narrative takes on even greater significance.
Right.
It's no longer just a personal story of survival.
Yeah.
It becomes like a weapon in the fight for abolition.
Wow.
It's a testament to the power of storytelling,
Right.
to change hearts and minds, to challenge injustice, to inspire action.
And that's a story that continues to resonate even today.
Oh, absolutely.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
It reminds us that even in the darkest of times,
Yeah.
there's always hope,
Right.
always the possibility of resistance,
Yeah.
always the potential for change.
And as we delve into the final part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
we'll see how Douglas continues to use his voice, his intellect,
Right.
and his lived experience to fight for equality and justice,
Yeah.
not just for himself,
Right.
but for all those who have been marginalized and oppressed.
So it's incredible to think about how Douglas went from escaping slavery to becoming a leading voice in the abolitionist movement.
Absolutely. It really speaks to his resilience
Yeah.
and his determination.
And what's even more remarkable
Yeah.
is that he achieved all of this in a society that was actively trying to silence him.
Right. To erase his voice.
Yeah.
To deny his humanity.
And, speaking of silencing voices,
Yeah.
there's a particularly striking passage where Douglas talks about the hypocrisy he saw in the church.
Oh, yeah?
It seemed like so many slaveholders were using religion to justify their actions.
Right, right.
So how did Douglas deal with that?
That's a question that just haunts this whole narrative.
Yeah.
Douglas saw firsthand how Christianity,
Right.
a religion that preaches love and compassion,
Yeah.
was twisted to support slavery.
Yeah.
He talks about slave owners quoting scripture to defend their cruelty,
Right.
using the Bible as like a tool of oppression.
It's like this painful irony.
Yeah.
Did he ever lose faith completely?
He struggled with it, for sure.
Yeah.
He talks about feeling disillusioned,
Yeah.
questioning how a just God could allow this suffering.
Right.
But he does find a way to reconcile his faith with his experience.
Okay, how so?
He came to see the true spirit of Christianity
Okay.
as aligned with the cause of abolition.
Okay.
He believed that a faith based on love and justice
Right.
could never condone slavery.
Of course.
He even recounts an incident
Yeah.
where a group of white Christians broke up a Sabbath school he was running for slaves
Really? Why would they do that?
because they were threatened by the idea of slaves learning to read,
Oh, wow.
fearing it would make them unmanageable.
Right, like Captain Auld said.
Exactly.
Wow.
They saw literacy as dangerous,
Yeah.
a threat to their power.
I think a reminder that the fight for justice is often met with resistance,
Absolutely.
even from those who claim to be on the side of righteousness.
And that's one of the most powerful takeaways from Douglas's narrative.
What's that?
It challenges us to look beyond surface appearances,
Right.
to question authority, to examine the systems in place that allow injustice to happen,
Right.
no matter how deeply entrenched they may be.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Douglas's story,
Yeah.
I keep coming back to this question, like, why does this story still matter today?
That's a great question.
This happened centuries ago.
Right.
What relevance does it have for us now?
I think the answer lies in the fact that while slavery has been abolished,
Right.
the legacy of that system is still here.
Right.
It's woven into our society,
Yeah.
our institutions, our laws, even the way we think about race and power.
So you're saying even though we've made progress,
Yeah,
there's still work to do to really dismantle the effects of slavery.
absolutely. We see this in the fight for racial justice. The disparities that still exist
Right.
in education, healthcare, the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
Douglas's story reminds us
Yeah.
that this struggle for equality is ongoing
Yeah.
and that we all have a role to play
Right.
in dismantling these systems.
And I think one of the most inspiring aspects
Yeah.
is Douglas's belief in the power of education.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He saw literacy as a path to liberation,
Right.
not just for himself,
Yeah.
but for all enslaved people.
His story really is a testament to the resilience
It
of the human spirit,
Yeah.
the ability to overcome even the most horrific adversity.
And I hope that our listeners,
Yeah.
after taking this deep dive with us, will be inspired to learn more,
Yeah.
to read Douglas's narrative themselves, to
Yeah.
engage with his history,
Right.
and to think critically about how we can all contribute to building a more just and equitable society.
Absolutely. We've only scratched the surface of this incredibly complex and powerful story, but I hope this deep dive has given you a deeper appreciation
Yeah,
for Frederick Douglass, his life, his words, and his enduring legacy.
absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been my pleasure.